From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages, as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and the water will come out of it so that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" This is God's good word for us, God's beloved people. Thanks be to God. So I'll give you, I don't normally do this. I don't normally, kind of lift the curtain of how these sermons come together, but I think it's relevant. I'll give you a window into my sermon writing process this week. Normally, my sermon writing day is Thursday. That way I've had the whole week to kind of think with it in the back of my mind, sit down, usually Thursday afternoon, and really get the sermon written. And so I was sitting down in my office Thursday afternoon, and I was coming up with all these ways that I can introduce this scripture, all these different very frustrating times that I've had in my life. I thought about writing an intro about how I was a first-year teacher and how frustrating being a first-year teacher can be, and it is incredibly frustrating. And I thought about the time I had broken my right foot very badly, and I was on crutches for 4 months and couldn't drive for 6 months, and being reliant on others for transportation. That was deeply frustrating. And then I thought about the time I walked across the entire country of Spain and how frustrating it can be to walk mile after mile after mile and never get any closer to your destination. I thought all of those were going to be really relevant. I was trying to decide between one and get it down on paper, but my phone kept ringing and just kind of rang incessantly. And I was getting texts and calls from pastor colleagues of mine, from friends of mine, and all they wanted to talk about was the coronavirus and what were we going to do about it. And I would sit down and start writing again, and before my mental wheels really got turning, my phone would ring again, and I'd be on the phone for another 20 minutes. And eventually I had a meeting with Don and Kirby, and then I had theology on tap, so eventually I just ran out of time to write. And then I had to reflect on it, and that maybe the intro to the sermon had written itself, that maybe it was time to talk about the coronavirus. Because I certainly did not get something else written. All I did was talk to people about the coronavirus on and off for several hours. And so we need to talk about it, friends. And yes, I know when we look out at the world right now, I am expecting the Mad Max future to break out at any moment. We're just going to have people dressed in punk rock outfits, driving modified hot rods, roving the earth. Sydney asked me, "Hey, should we start preparing for the coronavirus?" And what she meant was, should we go buy some extra food? And I said, "Yes, honey, I'm going to go attach the propane tank from our grill to the front of my truck so I can create a makeshift flamethrower so that I'm ready for we are exchanging gas and bullets for toilet paper." Because that's, it just feels like that, right? Things just have a super Mad Max vibe. Or maybe that's just me. I thought about spiking my hair into a mohawk and shaving the sides just so I could really get ready. Get some chains and some, Doc Martens, really be a good look. Take the doors off my truck, because who needs doors in this future? That's what it feels like, right? And yes, this has been quite an eventful week in the life of the world. It feels like just about everything we like and everything around us is shutting down. The nation of Italy, this kind of major tourist hotspot, is on absolute lockdown. Here's kind of a very famous site in Italy. This is normally standing room only. Those stairs are normally packed. There are 7 people in this shot. It's just shut down. On top of that, the Dogwood Festival here in Palestine is shut down. The NBA is canceled. The NHL is canceled. School is largely canceled across the country. College has been canceled for a week and a half. The MLB has delayed the season a month. NASCAR, I think, raced but with no fans or something. Like, it's just nuts what is happening. And on top of that, there is the toilet paper problem.
There you go.
Help me. Help me.
I got a really weird text message yesterday. It was like, Emily, our dear program director Emily, so this is not like fake news, this is a very reliable source, texted me. It's like, Trey, I just watched a fight in Walmart over toilet paper. And Brandy, I've done my reporting, I have 3 source confirmation on this. There was a fist fight in Walmart yesterday over toilet paper. I don't know why toilet paper. I have not figured that out. Only to say that Sydney and I legitimately...
Like you said, it's a good trading menu.
Right, yeah. Sydney and I needed toilet paper, and like our in-laws had to bring it to us from Mississippi to make sure that we were down to our last 2 rolls. I'm not hoarding toilet paper, but you need some toilet paper. Or just get in your shower, folks. It all goes, as someone told me recently, it all goes to the same place. You can't buy Lysol. You can't buy Lysol wipes. You can't buy, by the way, Windex and paper towels will do about the same thing. You can't buy toilet paper. There was a run on food yesterday. Like, it is just, people are panicking. And I still have not figured out why toilet paper is the thing. But we will all remember the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. Or some of y'all, and I'm not naming names, are going to have the next toilet paper for the next 20 years already in your house. I guess. It is clear our society is panicking. When there is a run on toilet paper, we know that some screw is loose. Panic has set in. It's a mess. And I confess, it is very easy to look out at the world right now and be afraid. We don't have existing data on this virus. We don't really know what it's going to do. Our decision makers are having to play ball with limited information. And when decision makers have to make decisions fast on limited information, it is rough. And so it is understandable why we can look out at the world and be frustrated at this moment. Frustrated meaning feeling like things will never change. Frustration sets in when you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you just feel like it's never getting better, it's never going to change, you're never going to move forward. We put one foot in front of the other, in front of the other, in front of the other, and meanwhile, it used to be I could buy Lysol but not toilet paper, and now I can't buy either, and now there was a run on hot dogs yesterday, right? And you can start to understand how that frustrated feeling, that feeling as if things will never get better, that will never make progress, it will never be good again, you can understand why we all, I bet, feel at least the temptation to that. So the open question for us as a Christian people is, how do we resist that? How do we resist that frustration? And to me, where we start resisting that temptation is looking at our history. This is where knowing and understanding where we come from becomes incredibly important. This is where the stories from the Bible that is our history, the history of people living with God, becomes incredibly important, because the Bible is not full of stories where it all went fine and then everyone was happy. No, the Bible often finds God's people in impossible circumstances, and yet, impossible as it may seem, God carried them through. How we resist this temptation to frustration is looking back and seeing what God has done, and then recognizing that means God can do that again. So we find ourselves this morning in Exodus chapter 17. We are about midway through the Exodus story. We are out of Egypt, but we don't have the Ten Commandments yet. That's kind of where we are. And the people are in a desert. And the people end up incredibly frustrated. And on one level, you might understand their plight. So we're going to look at this is the desert that they are in. Maybe. There we go. So that's the Sinai Desert. That's a view from the top of Mount Sinai. And you see how you can barely make out anything because it's all kind of rocky and brown? Does it look like there's a lot of water out there? There's maybe a bush. There's a settlement. By the way, that's a monastery. That was not there back then. Had St. Catherine's Monastery, that settlement up in the top corner. It doesn't look like a real fertile place, right? There's not even prickly pear or jackrabbits, neither of which live in Egypt. And so it's just rocks and dust and sand as far as the eyes can see. And so this is roughly where they are in their journey. And so they arrive in this place surrounded by dust and sand and rocks. And it's jagged rocks. It's not even fun rocks to walk on. And it just looks awful. And there are thousands of them. And there's no water. And they get to this place and they're thirsty. And I've been a Boy Scout. And when you run out of water, them's difficult times. Remember I was at Philmont once. And my whole crew ran out of water. We freaked out for 2 hours until finally our guide was like, look, y'all, we're going to find water. It's going to be okay. Just go over there. You might understand why they're a little frustrated. They're out of water. There are thousands of them, men, women, children, old folks, young folks, livestock, all of the above, traveling across the land, get to this place. There's no water. They go to Moses. Look, Moses, we came from a place that had a lot of water. This is what's happening in verse 3, right? They start to get on Moses' case, saying, but the people thirsted there for water. And the people complained against Moses and said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? We had a pretty sweet deal going under Pharaoh. We had absolutely no freedom. We were under the thumb of a man who thought he was a god. But, we got paid in beer. That's a true fact. And we had all the water from the Nile we could drink. That seems all right, given right now that we're dying of thirst in the wilderness. And you might understand that perspective, right? That fear sets in sometimes. When you look at circumstances and you go, man, I don't know what to do. I don't know how we're going to move forward. And if they had never met God before, if they never had any previous experience with the divine, I would understand the place they find themselves in. They didn't know that God could do miracles. They wouldn't have known how powerful God was. This might have been their first time, except that it's absolutely not their first encounter with God. In the previous chapter, they got so hungry that they yelled out to God, Moses, Moses, why'd you bring us out of Egypt? Because we had plenty of food, let's go back. And then in chapter 16, which ended right before chapter 17, verse 1, God sent the manna from the heavens and fed them now for 40 years from magical food from the sky. And then back in chapter 15, they cried out for thirst again. They had arrived at this place. There was no drinkable water. God had Moses throw a log into the water. That made it clean. I don't know why. Doesn't matter. They got water to drink magically from God 2 chapters ago. And then back in chapter 14, when they were being chased by the army of Pharaoh, the greatest superpower that had ever lived, a man who thought he was a god. They're being hounded by an entire army. God parted the Red Sea and then dashed that entire army to death underneath the waves of the Red Sea. That was 3 chapters ago.
And they forgot already.
And they forgot already. And before that, there were the plagues. And before that, God sent Moses. What's up? You start to understand Moses' frustration, right? Because Moses gets a little frustrated himself, and you can understand it. He says in verse 4, complaining to God, so Moses cried out to the Lord, what shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me. This is the same people that had just been fed miraculously from heaven. This is the same people that had been miraculously given drink 2 chapters ago. The same people that saw Pharaoh defeated, saw the plagues set upon Egypt, saw just how powerful God is.
Billions of gallons of water being pushed aside.
In fact, this group of people probably got to see the most concentrated group of miracles of any people ever, save maybe those who witnessed Christ's death and resurrection. And yet even they gave into this frustration, which they could have resisted if they'd only remembered 5 minutes ago and 10 days ago, earlier that year. Because God had carried them through trial after trial after trial. God had done miraculous thing after miraculous thing after miraculous thing. God had shown God's power over and over and over again, and yet they wanted to go back to the false god Pharaoh. You got to understand that Moses is not the main character of the book of Exodus. God is the main character of the book of Exodus. The first 15 chapters are the story of how God, the true God, defeated the false god Pharaoh. And then the second half of Exodus is how God then shepherded God's people, who are recalcitrant and kind of suck sometimes, to the promised land. And they wanted to go back to the false god because they were thirsty, even though the true God had fed them and given them water just in the last 2 chapters of the Bible. And once again, in verse 6, just like the time before, and the time before that, and the time before that, God took care of them. This is God speaking. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so the people may drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. I have a great painting I found of this moment of Moses just surrounded by water. This is not a photo. They didn't exist. But it's a really cool painting. It shows just this abundance of water. Guess what? It worked out again, just like last time, and the time before, and the time before that. God intervened. God was there. God's power carried them through. God hadn't miraculously left them between chapter 16, verse 36, and chapter 17, verse 1. In that period breath between those 2 moments, God had not mystically departed. God was still with them. He was still with them throughout and is still with us today. And so, friends, we need to remember in our mind that we have been here before and will be again. We have been in this place where we don't know what's going to happen. We have been in this place where fear and panic is run rampant. This has happened before. Right? Whether it was the financial crisis, or swine flu, or MERS, or SARS, or World War II, or the Spanish influenza, or the Spanish Inquisition, or the plague, or whatever, or the people who followed after Jesus after he had been killed by the Romans, or the early church as they were being persecuted by the Romans. Like, we have been here before, where we didn't know what was going to happen, where there was a lot of fear, and so we have often faced this temptation, to frustration. We have often found ourselves in this place where we don't know what to do, where it all looks scary, and the way forward, whether in our personal life or as a life of our species, has looked uncertain. And my friends, COVID-19 is not the last time this is going to happen. This is not the panic to end all panics. Maybe this time we're hoarding toilet paper, and next time we're hoarding gasoline, and the time after that we hoard lettuce for some reason. Who knows?
Oh my gosh.
It's all illogical. We've been here before. We'll be here again. And yes, I admit, things look rough. And I don't know. I have a degree in public health. I cannot tell you how this is going to work out. I can't. I wish I could. I wish I could point at this program or this idea or this thing that this person said or this one thing and that's going to make it all better. If I could do that, by the way, I'd be worth a lot of money if I had that solution. And I don't. I don't know. I just know we've been here before. And we'll be here again. And the other thing I know is that even if things seem impossible, God is a God of really big problems. God is the God of really big problems. God has solved some really big problems before. God spoke the universe into being. That's a heck of a problem he solved there. God, when Jesus was killed by the Romans, the most powerful empire that had ever lived, God snapped God's fingers, and on the third day, Christ rose from the dead. God created the universe. God defeated death. When the Romans were trying to stamp Christianity out by persecuting us, by killing us, by driving us underground, 350 years later, we were the church of the Roman Empire. We had overcome the Roman Empire because God is the God of big problems. And this is not the biggest problem that God has ever solved. God parted the Red Sea to defeat a superpower. God created food out of thin air. Moses struck a rock and out gushed water. God solved some pretty big problems. God can solve this one as well. Because remember, firmly I can declare, God is still with us. God is still here. God has not gone away. In the breath between yesterday and today, God has not magically withdrawn all the support. The Holy Spirit has not receded back into the sky. Christ has not magically left our hearts. The power of God has not left this world. The love of God has not left your life. The Spirit of God continues to move wherever two or more are gathered. There God will be, whether we have to do it via social distancing or not. God hasn't gone anywhere. That promise made at the beginning still stands. The promise to Abraham still stands. The promise implicit in Christ's life still stands. The Holy Spirit that descended at Pentecost still stands. The words of Romans 8 still stand, that nothing can separate us from the love of God. And that includes some virus with a stupid name. God is still here. The God who parted the Red Sea. The God who fed them with manna from heaven. The God who brought forth water out of nowhere. The God who raised Christ from the dead. The God who carried Paul through shipwreck and oppression. The God who saved our souls. The God who transformed our lives. The God who is still here, is powerful and with us. Do I know where this is going? No. Do I have faith that it's going somewhere? Yes. Not because I have faith in any particular government or any particular solution or plan or agency or man-made whatever, but only because I know God has carried us safe thus far. God is the God of big problems, and God remains with us now. May we put our faith there.
Yes, sir.
Where will there be hard times? Yes, probably. Have there been hard times before? Yes, absolutely. Look back at our history. Know where we came from. If you find yourself in self-isolation, there's a book I recommend that you read. It has many stories about how God has taken care of us. Read the story of the Exodus. Read the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego there in that furnace. That angel sat with them. Read the story of Daniel in the lion's den, where he could lie down comfortably with predators. Read the story of Christ's death and how very thoroughly they made sure he was dead and how very thoroughly he was alive and rose on the third day. Read the stories, friends, of where we come from. Because where we come from is hard times.
Oh, yes.
And the gift we had is that God was with us then. And so I have faith that God is still with us and we'll get through this hard time as well. Resist temptation by knowing where we come from. The story of our forefathers and our foremothers. We've been carried safe thus far. We'll make it home yet.